I always thought that family gatherings were supposed to be joyful, filled with laughter and love, but for me, they were a reminder of the hollow ache in my heart, a wound that never seemed to heal. I had been married for 3 years, and despite countless doctor's appointments, hormones, and shattered hopes, I still hadn't been able to give my husband what his family craved, a grandchild. It's not that I didn't share their dream, I wanted a child as much as he did, but an insidious cloud of infertility hung over my head like a guillotine, waiting to drop at any moment. At every family dinner, the conversation would inevitably spiral toward the kids my sister-in-law was expecting or the cute stories of my husband's childhood that I had heard 1,000 times, both of which sent a fresh wave of salt water stinging my eyes that I would fight to keep at bay. As the chatter became more pronounced, I noticed the unmistakable glances my mother-in-law would cast my way, the pitying concern pooled in her eyes like the still water of a stagnant pond. I could feel her discomfort, her insistent attempts to engage me in discussions about fertility treatments under the guise of concern and support. I hated it. I hated the unwelcome attention on my most vulnerable secret, the nagging whispers that echoed through my mind. I wasn't just a woman, but a broken cog in her family's wheel. It all came to a head last Thanksgiving, the air thick with expectation as the aroma of roasted turkey drifted into my nostrils like a false promise. After we had feasted, my in-laws gathered in the living room, eyes glistening under the faded twinkle lights, chatting animatedly about future family plans. My heart raced as I sensed the shift in focus toward me, the moment when my mother-in-law cleared her throat, the precursor to her infamous "let's talk about the future" speech. "So, when do you think we might meet our grandchild?" she pried, her voice steady, though I could hear the tremor of underlying desperation. It was as if every pair of eyes turned to me with that question, the words swirling in the air like vultures, scavenging the carcass of my dreams. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks and wanted to sink into the floor, to evaporate, but instead, with a jagged breath, I simply remained silent. My husband shot me a concerned glance, his father deflected with an awkward chuckle, but the damage was done. I felt raw, exposed, and utterly furious. Why should I have to discuss my deepest pain with people who only saw me as a vessel? That evening, as tension simmered beneath the surface, I retreated to the bathroom, clutching the cool porcelain sink, my heart racing as I battled the swirling storm of emotions. The shadows seemed to whisper, urging me to confront my in-laws about the delicate matter, to reveal the truth that felt more sacramental than flesh and blood. But all I could recall was a memory, the time I had briefly shared my struggles with close friends only to hear their casual insensitivity. "You can always adopt," was an unsolicited suggestion that had dug in like nails on a chalkboard. How could I trust anyone with this? Instead of expressing my frustrations, I turned my phone off and avoided them for the rest of the evening, feigning late-night work calls and bathroom breaks to escape their probing questions. When I returned to the living room, the chatter had shifted to other topics, my sister-in-law's baby shower planning, the grand plans summer would bring, all accompanied by the laughter and affection I had once thought unbreakable. I sat back down, feeling smaller than ever as my in-laws and husband conversed with ease, laughter cascading over me like a heavy wool blanket. I couldn't help but think that I had become a ghost in my own life, floating through moments that once filled me with joy but now only reminded me of the family I was struggling to provide. In the days that followed, our house grew quiet, almost painfully so. My husband, kind and patient, tried to forge conversations around my feelings, but all I felt was a wall robbing me of my voice. I became a coward, staring down the never-ending silence whenever my in-laws called or texted. Their messages turned from curious to frustrating, filled with concern that made my skin crawl. A week later, the family WhatsApp group ignited with photographs of my sister-in-law's ultrasound, and a tear slipped down my cheek as I muted the notification, each ping a dagger twisting into my heart. I felt like the villain of my own story, the one who refused to talk about the very thing that drained life from me. In my mind, I played a relentless cycle of what-ifs. What if I talk to them? What if I shatter their dreams? What if I shatter my own? I could feel the weight of family traditions and expectations pressing down on me like I was being submerged underwater, gasping for breath and desperate for release. As the cold chill of winter set in, I avoided attending holiday celebrations, ducking out of every gathering, and insisting on working through the long weekends, all while my heart sank deeper into despair. Then came the shocking twist. One late night, while scrolling aimlessly through social media, I stumbled upon a group dedicated to fertility issues, and suddenly, there it was, a thread that ripped the bandage off the wound I had tried to shield from the world. A woman, vulnerable and raw, told of her struggles and gave voice to the very pain I feared, and I felt it resonate within me like a forgotten song. As the comments poured in, each a testament to the shared struggle, it felt like a glimmer of hope. Until she casually mentioned, "Just remember to communicate with your loved ones, they can't help you if they don't know." Her words clung to the walls of my mind, pressing against the restraints I had put in place. That night, I finally broke down, tears flowing freely as I thought of my husband, the love we shared, and the family I had allowed to slip farther away. The next day, I took a deep breath, my heart still racing, and initiated a text to my in-laws asking them to meet me for coffee. I had finally decided, it was time to talk. The moment my mother-in-law walked into the cafe, I saw the flicker of hope in her eyes, only to be overshadowed by the uncertainty of what lay beneath. We chatted about benign topics for a while, but the air was thick with unspoken words. As the steam from our drinks rose like ephemeral ghosts, I finally opened my mouth, feeling the weight of every word crash down around us like waves against the shore. I spoke of my struggles, the heartache, and the silence that had become my wall. They listened in silence, and in those moments, when the truth laid bare between us, I felt the temperature drop, an awkward pause settling like dust after a storm. To my surprise, after a few beats of silence, my mother-in-law reached across the table, her hand clutching mine, offering more than just sympathy, it was the promise of understanding. I finally began to heal, slowly but surely, yet the path wasn't easy. Some days, I faltered, the weight of expectations still looming over me, but I knew that mothering would come in many forms, perhaps not the expected route, but one that was uniquely mine. As time progressed, I became part of those family conversations, advocating for my own journey to expand our family, while embracing the unexpected joys that awaited us, understanding that familial love is resilient and can be found even in the spaces of discomfort and raw honesty. Sharing my story didn't only help my in-laws understand the pain I carried, it liberated me from its grip, transforming the way we could interact with one another. I wouldn't be the perfect daughter-in-law or the perfect mother, but I would be something far richer, an authentic member of a family that, in its messy, imperfect beauty, could truly embrace one another for who we are. Even after all the pain, I found myself craving those family gatherings, looking forward to laughter, to the inevitable questions, but also knowing that this time, I'd be able to talk about the dreams that had once felt so out of reach. So, AITA for refusing to talk to my in-laws? No, I realized, I was just human, and sometimes it takes a little courage to find the voice that lays dormant within. When my grandmother passed away last month, grief wrapped around me tighter than the layers of fabric in my well-worn dark gray coat, the only one I'd ever needed for funerals. It didn't matter that it was the same coat I'd worn to bury my father just a few years before. I remember standing beside my mother at the dining table, her eyes swollen, reflecting a bleak mix of sorrow and irritation as she insisted that I needed a new black coat for the funeral because, in her words, black is the color of mourning, and your father would never forgive you for showing up in dark gray. I didn't understand why a different coat mattered so much when the sorrow it cloaked was the same, but she couldn't fathom that my attachment to that gray coat went beyond aesthetics. Desperate for my own space amidst the chaos of grief, I refused her demands, feeling my heart thud heavily as family discussions dwindled to whispered criticisms directed at me, portraying me as the ungrateful son who couldn't muster the decency to honor his deceased relatives appropriately. The societal pressure to wear a fresh coat became unbearable, and as I walked through the house that echoed with muted memories of family gatherings and laughter, I felt as though the essence of my loved ones lingered in the folds of that same coat, every crease a moment shared, every thread a lesson learned. On the night before the funeral, my mother barricaded herself in her room, and I found myself outside, staring at the growing shadows of the trees in our yard, their gnarled branches twisting like the pain inside me. I was losing everything dear, quickly engulfed by an anxious fog that choked my breaths, and yet, there was a stubborn part of me that clung to that old coat like a life buoy amidst rising tides of despair. Just as I resolved to wear what I felt connected to, I saw the weathered figure of my grandmother, her spectral form flickering in the moonlight, clutching the rope in her hands, just out of my reach. She whispered secrets of the past in the rustle of the leaves, and I felt something shift in my core, a reconciliation with her essence urging me onward. When I finally slipped that coat on, its lingering scent comforting and reminiscent of days gone by, I felt her approval envelop me, more potent than any new black fabric could offer. I may have failed to meet the expectations of a mother mourning her mother, but as I walked into the funeral home the next day, my chest expanded fiercely, fusing the layers of loss into one coherent resolve. However, it wasn't the weight of the coat that caught the attention of others, it was the hushed conversations around me, the scathing glares that sliced through the room and branded me as the odd son. My heart raced as I held my breath for the eulogies, seeking solace in the heartfelt sentiments shared by relatives, but when the speech turned toward traditional attire, my heart sank. I looked around to see the disapproving glances, relatives who I'd only ever seen dressed in black now aimed to paint my grief as colors beyond the spectrum of acceptance, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the disdain and disappointment whispered behind my back echoed louder than the sorrowful words being uttered. No. I wouldn't let that coat overshadow the memories embodied in my actions. I held the fabric tight, its significance well known only to me and my grandmother, who had poured her soul into sewing all the buttons that clasped their spirit through intertwining threads of our family's legacy. Halfway through the eulogy, I stepped outside to collect my thoughts, greeted by the crisp bite of late autumn air, which felt like a bitter reprimand, punctuating that pervasive loneliness which seemed to chase me even in the company of family. My resolve wavered as the temptation to conform roared in my chest. I shuffled my feet, heart pounding as whispers about me drifted through the thin walls, shrouding me in a tempest of guilt. Did I really deserve to hold on to my memories, my grief, while causing a rift in my family? Just as doubt flooded my being, a rustling sound came from behind me, an old woman in a shabby old coat, much like mine. She didn't appear lost in sorrow but radiant in the brilliance of her past. I noticed the subtle but defiant sparkle in her eyes. She leaned in and whispered, "Tell me, dear boy, does a coat determine love? Does the ink of fabric hold the grave weight of grief, its fabric woven in time?" A second passed, and I felt the urge to spill my heart to this stranger, her presence igniting a warmth that made the chill of discontent fall away. "Be true to your love, dear heart," she continued, "that is the only thread that carries you through the veil." By the time I returned inside, I had shed the chains of my mother's expectations, ready to face the judging gasps with conviction. I reclaimed that gray coat, stigmata of love laced with mourning. It had become a monument, and I, in my unyielding stance against convention, finally understood that it wasn't a question of right or wrong. It was a testament to the bond shared with those we have buried in the earth, a visual legacy that would haunt the fabric of our lives forever. Yet, just when I believed my resolve would silence the whispers, something jolted me, something I couldn't explain. As I stood there, tears spilling down my cheeks, the air grew painfully thick. A chilling wail erupted from behind me, sending a shiver down my spine as the elderly lady's comforting presence began to dissolve into darkness, the echoes of her words transforming into a strange song filling the room. It was as if the shadows were hungry for the bonds we'd forged, ready to unravel every moment I had thought was sacred. My heart raced again, but this time, it was gripped in vice-like fear. What had I unleashed by clinging to my beloved gray coat? Suddenly, the cacophony of mourning morphed into laughter. Family members were grinning grotesquely, their faces stretching uncomfortably, eyes gleaming with desperation as if they desired to wrestle my coat from me, as if the very fabric prevented them from accessing the shared mourning we all needed to bury. As they moved toward me, engulfing my space with taunts of betrayal, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had focused on me. The burden I carried had morphed into a sort of interloper that would not allow my family the catharsis they so demanded. I was slipping into a darkness that resonated deeply from the fabric, as though the memories that should have kept me rooted were becoming malicious, dragging me into depths of despair where coats had never mattered, but souls did. They were reaching for the coat, their laughter edging into madness, and I realized the family beneath the funeral garb had become ravenous specters, controlled by their hidden grief and impossible expectations. In that moment, grief twisted sinister, submerged in a deep well that churned beneath the fabric I clung to like a lifeline, and all I could do was turn and run, abandoning the whispers, the coiling darkness that craved to drag me into their ocean of shared torment, while my heart echoed with the ghosts of memory that tangled with the whispers of goodbye. Just when I thought I'd escaped the nightmare, I fell through the door, tumbling out into the cold world, only to see the reflection of that old woman, standing on the brink of the graveyard, beckoning me back as shadows flickered around my shivering frame. I screamed, not caring who heard me, trapped between guilt and love, whispers of family now reinforcing the doom that followed on the wind. "Ida," I thought to myself, clutching at the dark gray coat that reflected my soul's turmoil, feeling time unfurl as the threads of my life became wisps of mourning, as fragile and relentless as the hatred swelling within. I've always loved Thanksgiving, the extended family gatherings, the laughter, the food, and even the familiar bickering. This year, though, was different. My cousin Eric's girlfriend, Amanda, was 3 months pregnant and had decided to join us, which everyone was excited about, except for me. For some reason, Amanda had that air of drama swirling around her, a sort of chaotic energy that made me uneasy. The moment she stepped into my house, I felt a chill skitter down my spine. I didn't know if it was the winter wind or something about her gaze that seemed to promise trouble. Everyone else cooed over her, patted her belly, shared stories of their own parenting experiences, but I kept my distance. That night, as we all settled in for the Thanksgiving feast, my mom revealed there weren't enough beds in the house, so Amanda would have to sleep on the couch. This sparked an argument. Eric went all protective mode, insisting she could take his room, but my parents put their foot down, explaining that the couch was more than enough for one night. I felt a strange satisfaction wash over me as I watched Amanda's cheeks flush with anger, though I would later wish I'd kept that emotion locked away. After dinner, while everyone was engrossed in swapping family stories, I pulled Amanda aside, half expecting an apology, but instead, she confronted me with this glint in her eye that made me take a step back. "You think I'm here to ruin your perfect Thanksgiving? You don't know the half of it," she hissed. I wanted to laugh it off, but there was a flicker of something maniacal in her voice, something that said she wasn't just kidding. I shrugged it off, returning to the warmth of family, which suddenly felt a little too warm, suffocating under layers of heated conversations. Hours passed, and we finally retired for the night, but I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing faint whispers from the living room, the cadence of voices, but it wasn't just my family. It felt like there was something lurking outside the perimeter of our joy, creeping in with every soft chuckle and snicker. Around 2 a.m., I heard a loud thud, a sound that jolted me awake. I leapt from my bed and rushed into the living room, my heart pounding, ready to confront whatever had woken me. The couch was empty, Amanda was gone. Feeling a sense of dread stewing in my stomach, I called for her, and the sound echoed through the dark house, but there was no answering call. Panic set in as I sprinted to the front door. It was ajar, the cold night air swirling in threateningly, and I stepped outside, scanning the shadows, my breath coming in quick, icy puffs. That's when I spotted her, huddled against the porch railing, whispering frantically into her phone. As I got closer, I could hear the sharpness in her voice, the words turning into erratic sentences. "No, it's a mistake. They don't know yet, just keep it hidden. I'll figure it out. Just give me more time." My skin prickled, a chill gripped me as dread wrapped tightly around my throat. Before I could speak, she turned, and the look in her eyes, one of sheer panic, became engraved in my mind. "You shouldn't be out here," she said sharply, her demeanor shifting, an unsettling mask slipping into place. I stepped back, feeling quite small, while her expression turned to something darker. As I tried to recover the right words, there was a sudden rustle from behind me. I whipped around to see a figure emerge from the shadows, silhouette lurking just beyond the porch light. It looked like a man, tall and cloaked in darkness, but I couldn't make out his features. Amanda froze, then dropped her phone, eyes wide, and in that instant, I knew there was something utterly wrong. The man advanced toward us, a slow, predatory movement, and my instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet felt glued to the ground. Horror rendered me immobile. "You should have listened," the man growled, and with that, Amanda turned and bolted, the sound of her footsteps like thunder across the wooden porch. The man followed, and I finally snapped out of my stupor, rushing back inside and locking the door behind me, my breath ragged as I tried to gather my thoughts. I could hear Eric shouting her name from the other room, frantic and terrified as we all scrambled into the dark, hushed living room, the turkey and stuffing forgotten. We fanned out, searching for her, but it felt like an eternity until I spotted her through the frosted window, the shape of her bracing against the cold while Eric bellowed out pleas for her to come back. The man was gone, vanished into the ether like a specter of our worst fears. It was then I noticed the small puddle at my feet. I crouched down, the blood rushing to my ears, and I felt something cold grip my heart when I realized it was Amanda's phone, cracked and broken, the screen still lit. I picked it up and saw the last message on the screen: "Everything is in place. Just make it through the night." My blood ran cold as I looked at Eric, his face pale, worry-etching lines in his forehead, all of us frozen at that moment, tethered to a mystery that suddenly felt too close to home. Thanksgiving stretched into a nightmarish spiral of frantic calls and desperate searching, turning from family connections to sheer terror as Eric's pleas devolved into frenzied screaming the moment he learned Amanda was gone. We all felt it, a stranglehold of unease cloaked around our hearts. The police arrived, and everything blurred into chaos. They asked questions, but the answers were lost in disbelief, and in the flurry of sirens and blue lights, I felt a growing chasm of guilt filling my chest. It was my insistence on making Amanda sleep on the couch that had set this night into motion. Eric clung to the slice of hope that turned into despair as the hours crept on, tainted by the realization that we were merely pieces on a board of a game we never signed up for. In the end, they labeled it an abduction, a cold case that wouldn't let rest. That Thanksgiving, once filled with so much joy, morphed into a haunting echo in my mind, a chilling reminder that sometimes, the shadows of our decisions extend far beyond the light we perceive. I haven't been able to shake off the guilt, especially since the day Amanda disappeared was the day that I realized my family would never be the same. Now, every Thanksgiving brings back that crushing reality, a stain on our memories, and I can't help but wonder if she's still out there somewhere waiting, or if she's merely a ghost in the hollow echoes of family gatherings, sleeping on a couch that will forever remain vacant, a haunting reminder that some choices lead us to darkness, where the light can no longer reach. I thought I was doing the right thing when I invited my daughter, Ella, to my wedding. It was supposed to be my special day, a celebration of love that I had waited so long for, yet it quickly turned into a nightmare that threatened to unravel everything I had built. The wedding was supposed to be child-free, a choice my fiancé and I made after years of hearing the endless howls of kids at weddings, tugging at their parents' dresses, sticky hands everywhere, but I just couldn't bear the thought of leaving Ella with a babysitter that night. Her big, brown eyes filled with trust seemed to pierce through my steely resolve. I had spent so much time and effort planning this day, but the real truth gnawed at my insides. My ex-husband and the battles over custody had stripped so much joy from my life, the kind of joy that only a parent knew. Ella was not just my daughter, she was my greatest happiness in a life littered with heartbreak. When the day finally arrived, I felt a tension knotting my stomach. My friends raised eyebrows over Ella's presence, some shot disapproving glances as she twirled in her little dress, a tiny sunshine among the cynical clouds of adult resentment. I tried to brush off their comments, reassure them that she would be quiet, but deep down I feared this decision would come back to haunt me. As we exchanged vows beneath a blooming arch, Ella's laughter punctuated the solemnity of the moment, the sound bouncing off the walls of our carefully chosen venue, and for a fleeting second, I thought that maybe I had made the right choice, that love was expansive, that it could include the children we cherished. But as the reception began, chaos erupted in a way I couldn't have imagined. Ella, normally so sweet and well-mannered, seemed to sense my anxiety. She fidgeted around the table, her previous joy twisted into a frantic whirl of energy. Guests looked on with thinly veiled discomfort, and when she knocked over a whole tray of hors d'oeuvres, the loud crash reverberated around the space like a gunshot. The laughter quickly faded into whispers, the sight of my fiancé's face crumpling into pale frustration. "This is supposed to be a special day for us, can't you control her?" He hissed through clenched teeth, and I felt my heart splinter at his words. How could he say that? She was my daughter, my little miracle bathed in sun, and in that moment, the words felt as sharp as knives. I tried to explain, tried to apologize to my guests, who were visibly uncomfortable watching my face turn crimson with embarrassment, but I could feel the judgments rise like a palpable fog, affecting even the tightest of relationships, crumbling them beneath unseen pressures. A few brave souls tried to coax Ella back into calmness, but when I witnessed her slip into the shadows, a cute little flower girl becoming a confused little shadow, I rushed after her, desperate to find her back. It was in a small alcove near the bathrooms that I first saw it, a dark figure looming. It had to be a trick of the light, perhaps a misstep of my imagination, but the way its shadows stretched unnaturally across the tiled wall made my stomach holler. I took a step back in hesitation, but Ella laughed to greet the figure, drawing closer as it engulfed her in a cold haze. Panic clawed inside me, and I lunged for her as the figure raised a pale hand that flickered like a dying bulb. "Ella, come back!" I screeched, my voice a shriek that sliced through the laughter drifting from the reception. I yanked Ella into my arms just in time, and our eyes locked, a wondrous mixture of fear and diligence coiling in her innocence, shadows shattering beneath the flickering lights above us, replacing laughter with an ominous hum. My fiancé and the guests had begun to filter toward us, drawn by my sudden panic as I tried desperately to shield her from the darkness that prowled around the corners where no one dared to look. He was furious, and when he saw how scared I was, his anger morphed into confusion, but when he looked upon Ella, my precious girl clutching my hand with terror etched into her little features, his warmth shattered. I saw it, the way his eyes flicked back to the figure, now hovering silently, a spot of ink threatening to consume my life in darkness. People were gasping as the words fell from my lips, things I could barely comprehend. It's coming for her. But as I tried to urge him to flee, to run, the shadows engulfed the light, filling the room with whispers of my past regrets, and it seemed uncertainty struck him harder than fear, causing him to freeze as the figure drew ever closer, the darkness twirling around like wisps of smoke. As the chaos descended, guests fled to the corners, drawn into their own fears and superstitions, even if no one truly understood what was happening, and I was left holding Ella, the weight of my choices crashing like waves against my breastplate. The figure began to laugh, a twisted, echoing sound like shattered glass, and as I turned away from it to shield my daughter from the chaos, I felt the warmth seep from my soul. Nobody was coming to help. Desperation clawed at me, and with one last surge of strength, I broke free from the icy void, pushing through friends and family, shivering against the noise that raged around me to escape into the night. We barely made it to the car, the headlights flickering like the sanctity of promises broken, as that chilling laughter still echoed behind. Inside, the air grew thick with tension, a web of haunting memories woven in silence, and I tried to comfort Ella, but the truth hung in the air like a dark cloud. We barely escaped, but we still bore the burden of fear, of choices lost to shadows yearning to reclaim what it could never have. Some may say I was the villain of my own story, AITA for bringing her where she was never meant to be, but in that darkness, I started to realize that the real question was how far I would go to protect my daughter from an entity that represented all my past mistakes, draped in the guise of love and light. As we drove away, Ella's gentle question pierced through the suffocating veil, "Mom, are we ever going back?" And I didn't have an answer. When I was a little girl, I dreamt of my wedding day with a fervor that would make even the most hard-hearted cynical adult roll their eyes, and if you had asked me then, I would have told you that my dream dress was a breathtaking pink gown, the kind that twirled like cotton candy beneath layered lights at sunset. Fast forward to my engagement, and my fiancé, Derek, was everything I could ask for. His smile lit up my world, and his laughter felt like home. But when I finally unveiled my cherished vision of a pink wedding dress to him, the look on Derek's face fell faster than I could catch it. He chuckled, which only deepened the crease across his brow. I pictured white, you know. Traditional. For the photos. As if my heart hadn't already begun to sink, I tried to brush off his hesitation, assuring him that love was what mattered most, and pink could be the essence of our shared joy. I revisited the boutique alone, the walls decorated in thousands of hues of white, and there, hanging like a forgotten story, was my original vision, a delicate pink dress, with a satin underlay that shimmered like the dawn. I slipped it on and stood before the mirror, and for the briefest moment, I felt perfect. I chose to go ahead with what my heart desired and marked the day with pink every step of the way, a pink cake, pink flowers, even pink shoes. What should have been a joyful time took a perilous turn when I announced those plans at our engagement party, where friends and family gathered, the city skyline glowing behind them. Family members gave polite claps, but I noticed my mother's jaw tighten and my grandmother's eyes narrow. What happened to the beautiful white wedding dresses? My mother questioned, her tone dripping with disapproval. It felt as if the air thickened, my smile wavering under the weight of their stares. Derek, after lagging behind with a muted expression, pulled me aside later, voicing his concerns in a hushed whisper, words about tradition and expectations spilling forth, drowning me in regret. "You know it's important to my family, right?" The doubt nestled itself in my stomach like a lead weight. My heart raced as he tried to convince me that I should reconsider, but it was too late to turn back. I was headfirst submerged in a sea of satin pink and deep disappointment. I had visions of our special day twisting like a terrifying dream I couldn't wake from, and the anxiety seeped into the planning, igniting late-night arguments that pushed him away from me instead of drawing us closer. The week before the wedding loomed like a storm cloud, the colors clashed so vividly with the black and white portrait of my future in-law's expectations. I couldn't sleep, the pink parasol and blush decorations filling every corner of my mind like quicksand. It was like a haunting chorus, and just before I drifted into a restless sleep, I found myself centered once more, a dreamlike image of walking down an aisle of happiness. All that mattered was our love and not the color of my dress. Then, on the day before the wedding, I received a message from my brother. "Mom and Dad are fighting. It's bad." A wave of dread washed over me as I found myself torn between my loyalty to my family and my heart's desire. The chasm widened between my decisions, and on the fateful morning, I donned my pink dress alone in the hotel suite, my mother's disapproval echoing like a ghost trapped between and among all the swirling laughter of pre-wedding chaos. The sight of myself sent adrenaline rushing through my veins. I did look beautiful. As the ceremony began, however, I spotted Derek's family, shoulders rigid and jaws tight. My heart sank further with every step that carried me into their line of sight. Their eyes, void of understanding, chased away the joyful spark I had longed for. By the time we exchanged vows in front of our loved ones, I felt a churning pit of anxiety in my stomach. I wished for one person to embrace me and validate my choices, and yet I found only silence from my family's corner. The flush of embarrassment was invaded further, creeping in like vines on ancient stone. After the ceremony, as we danced surrounded by a bittersweet haze of joy and resentment, my grandmother confronted me about my foolhardiness. "You won't honor tradition? On a day meant to bind your families." Her words were like shards of glass, and I fought the urge to scream. I tried to defend my actions, a flimsy paper boat riding the turbulent waves of emotion, and soon the reception spiraled into chaos. Derek's voice pierced through the crowd, a mix of frustration and disappointment mirrored in his eyes as I stood before my family and his, my pink dress like bandages on wounds that would never heal. The noise blurred into a cacophony of judgment and misunderstanding, laughter stained with unceremonious rejection, and in that moment, I felt a distinct fracture forming. The tension thickened so much that it became impossible to navigate. The phone rang, breaking the anguished silence that shifted our worlds into turmoil. My father, voice tremulous, came hurtling into the room. "You need to come home. Now." Panic rose within me, as dread settled deep in my bones, an omen I couldn't escape. I thought about that pink dress, now drenched in symbolic blood. What was a celebration had become a battleground, leaving behind only the ruins of my dreams hanging like broken glass. When Derek saw the fear flashing in my eyes, he took my hand, pulling us away from their judging glares. "We'll make this right," he whispered, but I had no idea what that meant, whether our love could withstand the chaos we had unleashed. Yet a sliver of hope pierced through the shadows as we stepped beyond the threshold of acceptance and rejection, the pink fabric swirling around me, a whirlwind of sorrow and love intertwined. In those moments filled with disbelief, it became painfully clear that weddings shouldn't be a battlefield, yet here we found ourselves entrenched. Now a question ignited within: AITA for drama over a pink wedding dress? As I processed the fallout creeping into our lives, one thing was certain: it would take more than a color to define the love we were scrambling to salvage. Every year during summer break, my family and I head to our favorite lakeside cabin, a place marked by its tranquility and untouched beauty. It's always been a retreat from the chaos of life, but this last trip took a turn that still keeps me up at night. We arrived late on a Friday, just as a thunderstorm began to roll in, dark clouds brewing ominously over the mountains. My parents settled, and while I grabbed my backpack and headed to the rickety old pier, hoping to catch a moment of calm before the storm hit. As I stood staring out at the choppy water, I felt a presence beside me. I turned to see a girl, maybe a year or two younger than me, her auburn hair drenched by the rain, and her eyes wide as if she had somehow slipped into a different reality. Without a word, she motioned for me to follow her down the pier. Intrigued but slightly uneasy, I obeyed, as if bound by some invisible thread. She walked with a purpose until we reached the end, where the distance from land felt surreal, as if we were standing on the edge of the world. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice trembling. Just then, the sky split with a blinding flash of lightning, and I jumped, splashing into the murky water below. The last thing I remember was the girl's scream as I felt the cold envelop me, sinking deeper until everything went black. When I came to, I was gasping for air, my chest heaving as I clawed my way back to the surface. I looked around frantically for the girl, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. I pulled myself onto the pier, soaked and terrified, but a part of me felt something I can only describe as wrong, a whispering dread that knotted in my stomach. I noticed the weather had gone eerily calm, the storm clouds dissipating as the sun peeked through the trees. Shivering, I hurried back to the cabin, brushing off my encounter as a strange dream. The next morning, the sun shone bright, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched as we went hiking along the scenic trails. It was there I overheard my parents casually talking about a little girl who had gone missing 2 summers ago, last seen near the lake. They said she had drowned, and with a chill, I wondered if this was the girl I had met. Later that evening, while my family played games inside, curiosity gnawed at me, and I slipped back down to the lake. The bright moon hung low in the sky, casting shimmering silvery light on the water, and I couldn't shake the feeling I was meant to be there. I called out, hoping to hear that girl's voice again, but only silence answered. Suddenly, I heard splashing, and then whispering. The whispers turned into chants as other shadows emerged from the woods. Their faces were obscured and it felt like they were both there and not there. They pointed at me, demanding I join them in their fray, but I was rooted in place, paralyzed by fear. That girl appeared again, her face twisted in anguish, as if pleading for help, and I felt an uncontrollable impulse to step forward. But as I did, an unseen force pulled me back, and I resisted. That's when I heard it, a voice from the shadows, sickly and sweet, taunting, "You could save her, but it will cost you your joy." I couldn't understand, my heart racing as I felt the shadows drawing closer. Panic surged, and for reasons I still can't fully explain, I turned and ran, bolting back towards the safety of the cabin, my mind flooded with the realization that I could never return to the lake. The following day, my family checked out a bit earlier, perhaps sensing my distress. I kept having nightmares about that girl, about the shadows lingering by the lake. Days turned into weeks, and I convinced myself it was all just a figment of my imagination, a trick of the summer blues. But then came the phone call. It was a local news report about the lake. A girl had gone missing once again. She fit the same description as the girl from my summer. My heart dropped, and guilt washed over me, the kind that feels like a lead weight dragging you down. Could I have saved her? The thought gnawed at me, but deep down, the whispers in my head urged me to let it go, telling me I was being ridiculous. Still, I couldn't shake that eerie connection, feeling as if I had witnessed something I shouldn't have. My dreams grew darker, filled with shadows and whispers, and I wouldn't let myself swim anywhere near that lake again. As summer bled into fall, I tried to put it all behind me, but one night, while scrolling through social media, I came across a post that made my blood run cold, a photograph of that girl, smiling brightly, captioned, "Missing, please help us find her." Only this time, the comments were filled with those same shadowy figures from my dreams, claiming they could help, that they knew where she was. I barely slept that night, haunted by the thought that I had left her behind. And then, without warning, the shadows came back. They invaded every corner of my mind, filling my thoughts with despair and fear until the following summer rolled around, and my parents announced we'd be heading back to the cabin. My heart raced at the thought, and despite feeling unwell, I couldn't let my parents know. I had to face whatever darkness awaited me. When we arrived, everything seemed normal, no signs of the girl, just peace and quiet, the lake shimmering under a golden sunset. I convinced myself I was imagining it all until that very first night. I went for a walk along the pier and, as soon as I stepped onto the dock, I felt it, the cold breath on my neck and the whisper of a name, urging me forward. Ignoring every logical reason, I walked to the end of the pier, and there she was, emerging from the depths of the water, her pale face shimmering under the gathering moonlight, the shadows twisting around her sorrowful eyes. "Help me," she begged, her voice echoing across the water, and I felt my resolve crumble. I stepped closer, reaching my hand out, but that's when the shadows bubbled up, swallowing her whole as their whispers turned into a deafening roar. "You should have saved her," they cried, and I finally stumbled back, horrified beyond comprehension. My body felt frozen, my breath caught in my throat, as reality shattered. I dropped to the ground, overwhelmed by a flood of sorrow as my tears cascaded like rain. Suddenly, the girl emerged from the depths again, and she cried, but this time the sound pierced deep into my soul, ripping me apart, leaving me bare. "You let me drown," she screamed, her voice merging with the shadows. I felt like I was being tossed between worlds, lost in their twisted grasp. Finally breaking free from the haze, I turned and bolted back to the cabin, knowing that I could no longer live in denial. The next morning, I gathered my courage and confessed to my parents, hoping against hope they could help me understand, but they only looked at me with concern, brushing off my tales as a youthful imagination. They didn't understand what I had witnessed or felt, nobody ever did. Days went by, each one cementing the dread that had taken root in my heart, and when the time came for us to leave, I knew with clarity, I'd be forever haunted by that girl's anguish, an echo of guilt that would never fade. I boarded the car, every thought consumed by shadows, the whispers now entwined with my own thoughts, haunting me relentlessly. "You should have saved her," they taunted, their voices familiar yet alien, sending shivers down my spine, and as we drove away, I couldn't help but look back at the lake, the last vestiges of sunlight catching its surface, that eternal stillness reflecting a million stars above, and I screamed at the top of my lungs, a desperate plea to whatever forces lingered in the dark waters, "I am so sorry." But I knew then, it would never be enough to drown out the silence that followed. When I first moved into my tiny 2-bedroom apartment with Clara, I was excited to finally have a place of my own, an escape from the oppressive atmosphere of my childhood home. Clara was friendly and welcoming, and we bonded over our shared love of late-night baking marathons and binge-watching true crime documentaries. Everything was great until one evening, when I got home late after a long shift at the diner and decided to whip up a batch of cookies to unwind. The smell of chocolate chip dough rising in the oven felt like home, familiar and comforting, but just as I pulled the tray out, Clara's voice cut through the sweetness of the moment. "Can we talk?" she asked, her expression serious, which struck me as odd. I set the warm cookies on the cooling rack and sat down at the small kitchen table, eager to hear what was bothering her. Clara lowered her voice, as if someone might overhear us, and said, "I need you to promise me you won't use the oven again." My heart dropped, the request clawed at my mind, a bone-chilling whisper of unreasonableness. "What? Why?" I asked, incredulous. You just can't," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. Every fiber of my being wanted to dismiss her, but my curiosity got the better of me. "Is this about your weird family back home?" I pressed, remembering the odd traits she'd shared, like her great-grandfather's obsession with farming the land even after moving to the city. Clara's gaze suddenly turned distant, like a clock unwinding. "It's for your own good," she said quietly, and that's when I noticed how her hands were clenched into tight fists, her knuckles white against the faded oak of the table. I tried to reason with her, tell her that in all my previous apartments, I'd always used the oven, it was essential, the heart of my culinary dreams. But Clara remained firm, almost fearful. So, night after night, I reluctantly complied. My meals became monotonous, leaning heavily toward microwave dinners and takeout, leaving the oven untouched and the rich aroma of baked goods locked away in my yearning heart. I could feel the tension building, so I decided to do some digging and look through the boxes Clara had left unpacked since the move. I found an old, dust-covered cookbook bound in frayed leather that caught my attention, dog-eared and marked with strange symbols I didn't recognize. Flicking through pages, I discovered handwritten notes and a hurried scrawl that spoke of rituals, of family traditions lost to time, and warnings against the oven being a portal of sorts, a gateway for something sinister. That night, I tentatively approached Clara as she flicked through channels, eyes glazed, and asked her about the cookbook. Her face turned pale, she snatched it from my hands, growling, "You shouldn't have looked at that." I recoiled, and she suppressed a sob as if she were about to spill secrets wrought with anguish. "What is happening, Clara?" I urged, but she shook her head in the manner of a child being lectured, whispering about how the oven shouldn't be used, how it belonged to a legacy far darker than we could comprehend. As the days dragged on, wrapped in her escalating mania, I finally lost my patience. It was a Thursday night, and I needed to bake something, anything, to reclaim my sanity. I woke up in the dead of night with an insatiable hunger for something freshly baked. Quietly, I crept into the kitchen, adrenaline coursing through my veins, and leaned over the counter where my food scale and mixing bowls lay patiently. Ignoring my better judgment, I started to gather my ingredients. I turned the oven knob, feeling a sense of rebellion surge through me, and that beautiful glow flickered to life, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. As I mixed together the batter, I could have sworn I heard something in the distance, a whisper echoing from deep within that old cookbook. The moment my cookies started to brown, the shelves rattled under an invisible force. Confusion flooded my senses, maybe it was an earthquake, or perhaps Clara had returned. But as I peeked through the window into the deep ink of midnight, I saw her. She was standing in the darkness of the courtyard, her back to me, whispering in a language that was sharp and foreign. I felt the door swing open behind me, a gust of wind that carried Clara's scent, something floral yet cold, like autumn leaves. I spun around, heart pounding, only to find the oven door flung wide open, steam billowing out like ethereal smoke. As I leaned forward, horrified, I noticed that my beautifully baked cookies had transformed into grotesque, burnt shapes, almost as though they were alive, broken shells shrieking silently in my mind. A low growl reverberated from the oven, the temperature surged, and the shadows coalesced into a swirling mass. The realization hit me swiftly. Clara had been keeping me from using the oven for a reason, a warning cloaked in paranoia. I reached for the cookbook, my fingers trembling, but Clara appeared behind me, her face twisted, fury and sorrow etched into her features. "You weren't supposed to see," she shrieked, and as I turned, the shadows seemed to reach out, lunging toward her. She stumbled backward, nails clawing at the wooden floor, a scream pouring from her lips as the darkness enveloped her. I was frozen in shock as she was dragged into the abyss of the oven, the growls intensifying, final echoes of her terror haunting the air. I blinked and found myself alone, the kitchen illuminated eerily by the oven's light. The cookbook lay open on the table, words shifting like quicksand, warning me, never again. My heart raced as a burning rage ignited within me. Yet, the overwhelming dread remained. I staggered back, staring at the melted remnants of the cookies that felt like pieces of souls. I stumbled out of the kitchen, breath quickening, feeling Clara's absence like a chasm in my chest. I don't think I will ever truly understand what happened that night. Days passed, and I couldn't bring myself to open the oven again. I lived off cold meals, the silence echoing in the apartment, and every time I caught a glimpse of the cookbook, its call now tainted with dread, I felt a presence lurking within its pages. I've tried to move on, but whispers follow me, warning me that the oven's portal is still alive, a void waiting to swallow more. Now, every time I hear a knock on my door or see a shadow dart in the corner of my eye, I can't help but wonder if Clara is still out there. I still hear her voice sometimes, calling softly, begging for help against the darkness, a darkness I helped unleash by breaking a promise. So, here I am, AITA for wanting to use the oven, or is she still watching from whatever realm those shadows had taken her to, forever reminding me of what the oven truly holds? When my fiancé, Tom, and I decided to move into our first home together, I imagined the smiles, laughter, and warmth we would fill it with, but everything changed the day I voiced my concern about his cousin's girlfriend, Clara. Clara had always rubbed me the wrong way, her laughter too loud, her words too cutting, and one particularly unsettling memory of a family barbecue haunted me. She cornered me, her cold eyes glinting with mischief, and whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear, about my past struggles with anxiety, painting me as some fragile, broken person. I brushed it off back then. Family dynamics can be complex, and feigned a smile while the red crept up my neck. But as moving day approached, I felt a creeping dread about the idea of her plopping on our new couch, treating our space like her personal stage. So, in an attempt to safeguard our peace, I brought it up to Tom, explaining how uncomfortable it made me to think she'd feel entitled to our home, that I just didn't want her to bring her drama and condescension into this new chapter of our lives. To my shock, he looked at me like I'd slapped him, his brows knitted in confusion, as he insisted that family gatherings were meant to be inclusive, and Clara was part of that family, and somehow it spiraled into a heated argument where he accused me of being controlling, selfish, not understanding the importance of his family to him, and in that moment, I felt the weight of isolation as he doubled down on inviting her, claiming I was overreacting, that I was the one causing a rift between us. I found myself in the eye of a storm I couldn't comprehend, where my feelings meant nothing, and he chose blood over the woman he was supposed to love most. It shattered me, and I felt like a villain in my own life, a true the fiancé versus the cousin's girlfriend tale playing out in a twisted sense of irony, and I thought of the odd glances she wouldn't hesitate to throw at me whenever Tom wasn't around, her calculated remarks piercing like daggers, but I kept quiet. When moving day arrived, the last thing I wanted was conflict, so I plastered on a smile and welcomed the chaos that came with a dozen family members stepping over boxes and trailing dirt onto our floors, but deep down I could feel that storm brewing. I'd already warned Tom, hadn't I? As the day unfolded, the house buzzed with laughter and chatter, and amidst the crowded living space, there appeared Clara, strutting in like she owned the place, her outfit representing some twisted version of classy. I felt an unsettling heaviness in my chest, and I excused myself to the kitchen for a moment of sanity, hoping a few deep breaths could drown out the noise. I poured myself a glass of water, feeling the cold glass against my sweaty palm when suddenly Clara appeared at the door, leaning against the frame with that same mocking grin. "Aren't you tired of pretending to be the perfect fiancé? Or does he not mind that you're really just a little weirdo?" she said, taking a deliberate step closer as if to intimidate me. Panic bubbled within me, and all the moments I had held back came flooding to the surface. I blurted out that she was unwelcome in our home. Silence. The kitchen, once filled with the scent of garlic and roasted chicken, turned so still it felt like I had yanked out the air from the room. Time slowed as her expression shifted, eyes narrowing, lips curling into a smirk tinged with malice. You really think a little boundary will save you? This is not just your house, this is our family, dear, she hissed, emphasizing the word "our" with venom that sent chills down my spine. It was at that moment, watching her intense gaze penetrate through my facade, that I realized I had inadvertently wedged myself deep into a battle I was bound to lose. The wall between us felt insurmountable, and when I finally emerged from that kitchen, it was to a scene that felt surreal, Tom caught in a web of confusion and frustration as Clara spilled the beans about our little confrontation. The smiles turned into whispers as a funeral-like hush descended over our guests. I could see some looking at me in pity, others stunned, and the dagger of humiliation plunged deeper into my already frayed nerves. It felt like I was standing on a precipice, the ground trembling beneath me, and in a split second of sheer panic, I realized I was not the only one threatened by this shattering tension. Tom's eyes flashed with anger, disappointment, and betrayal, and before I could explain, I felt the cold weight of the room's judgment tighten around my throat. He turned to me, voice low and trembling. Why would you do that? Why would you make a scene? It struck me like a slap in the face, heartbreaking because this wasn't about me being the focus of the drama. I had only been trying to set the stage for a peaceful beginning, so why couldn't he see that? Determined to resolve the chaos, I tried justifying my feelings, asserting my need for boundaries, but all I got in return was the flicker of anger in his eyes, a refusal to understand. Clara was still smirking, her victory evident as she leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, soaking in every moment of my humiliation. I felt as if I was the intruder in my own life, torn between my love for Tom and the need for self-respect, my very existence reduced to a battle over territory, and I finally spoke the truth, that I wasn't comfortable with Clara slipping in and out of our lives like she was a part of the furniture, and that anger transformed into terrible isolation as Tom stepped back, shaking his head, whispering that I didn't know how to play nice with family, that I would always be an outsider to his world. The words pierced deeper than anything Clara could have said. I stood there, wrestling with waves of despair, realizing the nightmare was not just her presence but the fact that I was losing him. It felt surreal in the aftermath as people hovered awkwardly, unsure whether to support me or defend him, the tension strangling the air, collapsing my hopes of love into ashes. I tried to refuse Clara's smug smile, but the reality sunk in like the darkness gathering around me. This was never going to end well, and as the night dragged on, I watched Tom grow more frustrated, more distant, and I realized that in trying to stand my ground, I had unwittingly dug a grave for our relationship, slowly trapped in a dissonance that had settled over both our lives, one that made me question if I was the villain or merely a puppet pulled by strings of a vengeful fate. Now the boundaries blurred, and all I could wish for was to rewind. Instead, I found myself waking up in our new home alone the next morning, losing sight of the dreams I once had, staring at the walls which felt less like comfort and more like a cage filled with memories of regret, uncertain whether Tom would choose to fight for us or slide into the shadows, where Clara lurked, waiting to further her twisted campaign against the fragile remnants of what remained of our love. I always thought high school drama was exaggerated in movies, but nothing could have prepared me for what unfurled one fateful Friday afternoon as I shoved my books into my backpack with trembling hands, my mind racing with anxiety over the upcoming prom. I had a casual friendship with Ethan, a guy who was smart and funny but had prolonged his geeky phase through all 4 years of school, and though he had a crush on me, I could never consider him as a prom partner, not with there being a big social hierarchy that I was desperately trying to navigate. It was already bad enough that Jenna and her clinging normie crew were constantly whispering about me, labeling me the loner who dared to choose her own path outside of their cliques. It was just supposed to be a night of fun and dancing, but I couldn't shake off the pressure of finding the perfect date to prove I belonged. As if the universe were mocking me, my phone buzzed with notifications, each one signaling a growing storm, Jenna's endless posts on social media revealing her preparation for the big night, and my heart sank as I saw her prime date, a popular guy, laugh and bewitch everyone with his charm. That morning, I had finally made it clear to Ethan that he wasn't my type. I had taken care to soften the blow but left him crushed nonetheless. Then came the worst part. His mother decided to confront me. She found me waiting at the school gates, her eyes sharp and probing, like those of a hawk who has spotted something amiss. "My son told me you've decided not to take him to prom," she said, her voice laced with aggression. I offered her a polite smile, trying to diffuse the rising tension, but she bulldozed right through it. "You need to look at your own choices," she insisted, drawing nearer, the scent of her cheap perfume wrapping tightly around me, like a noose. I could feel myself becoming dizzy, trapped in a suffocating spiral of anger and fear. The nerve of her, accusing me of ruining her son's prom when they hadn't even asked themselves the question that mattered. Why would I choose someone who spent most of his time obsessing over comics and video games? Listen, I managed to say, my voice steadier than my shaking hands, AITA, for telling you to look at your son before blaming me. He's sweet, but he deserves someone who cherishes him, not just someone looking for a pity date. Time felt suspended as silence enveloped us. I braced myself for the explosion, my heart hammering in my chest, but just as her mouth opened, I caught sight of Ethan watching from a distance, his expression unreadable, a mix of shock and sorrow. Something in me broke at that moment, my conscience screamed at the pile of unnecessary blame heaped upon me. But then the mother hissed, "Don't think for one moment that this is over. You will regret this." The ominous chill in her tone cut right through my initial bravado, leaving an unsettling knot in my stomach. I left school that day haunted by my words, wrestling with fear that I'd crossed an unseen line, and as promised, the worst followed. First it was small things, a flat tire on the way home, bizarre coincidences that felt like the universe was suddenly aligning against me. But at prom, things escalated viciously. Jenna and her gang surrounded me, each pitiful story swinging like a pendulum, as they mercilessly dissected my past choices in the light of social media turmoil, revealing the ugly underbelly of high school politics. I felt like a pariah, watching them tear down everything I thought I'd done right, with every smug remark layered with laughter. Just as it seemed I'd reached the lowest point of despair, the lights dimmed in the hall and the music thumped, drowning out Jenna's taunts momentarily. It felt almost cinematic as I moved towards the punch bowl, desperate for solace. But then, behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of a throat being cleared. I turned around to see Ethan, his mother lurking behind him, her eyes glinting in the dark like a predator ready to pounce. "You think this is over?" She snarled again, and before I could respond, I bolted towards the exit, adrenaline surging through my veins, only to find myself cornered in a dimly lit supply room where she followed, her intentions written clearly across her face. I desperately scanned for an escape route, but she was too quick, locking the door behind her, trapping me in this nightmare. "You think you can just turn him down and not expect consequences? You need to realize who you're dealing with," she said, her voice like ice. My heart raced. I tried to explain myself, but the words were lost amid the mounting terror. For a fleeting instant, Ethan appeared in the threshold, reaching for the handle, but his mother grasped my arm tightly, her grip unyielding, fixing me with a crazed expression, as if laced with a dark, hidden madness. "You're going to pay for breaking his heart. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about you," she hissed it like a curse, and in that instant, an overwhelming wave of helplessness gripped me, my nights of dread crashing into unbearable terror. My cell phone buzzed in my pocket, a true signal from the outside world, and with a jolt I reached in to find a series of frantic messages from friends, some concerning their own safety at home. But I had less time than I thought. Ethan finally managed to force the door open, and just as he did, his mother released her hold on me, and I stumbled backward into a wall. She turned to him, her face now a canvas of rage and grief, and with one swift, disarming gesture, she transformed from the predator to the victim, screeching about betrayal and ungrateful girls. I stepped back, panic and disbelief dancing between us as Ethan stood there, frozen, jaws clenched, his eyes darting from me to his mother, that one moment a lifetime of silence. I could see the flicker of realization overwhelm his features, as he turned away from her, and in that tense, split second, the promise of something both terrifying and liberating dawned within me. "Ethan, it's okay," I blurted out. "There's more to you than any of this." I would never forget the look on his face as he eventually stepped back, the weight of his past shattering under the reality of who he could be. As his mother shrieked one last time, the moment spiraled until it burst into 1,000 fragments, but one thing was clear: I was done being their scapegoat, their pawn in a game I didn't choose to play. The horror of their vindictive pull fluttered away as I stepped into the light, the weight of that night turning into fuel igniting my resolve to find my own way, uncaged from the illusion of what prom should have been. Some choices felt like chains, but I realized some were roads that led right back to dignity. All it took was the courage to walk away. A few weeks later, as high school faded into something only an afterthought, I discovered Ethan had unfollowed his mother on social media, cutting her negative influence clean from his life. And while I never heard from his mother again, the memory of that encounter lingered, a reminder of the darkness that once threatened to engulf me, a specter now banished under the light of a new beginning.